Hi guys, new series of Outside the Margins with Ronnie and Craig, and our guest tonight is Gary Evans. How are you, Gary?
I'm very good, thank you, and thanks for having me on the show.
Not a problem.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. And it's great to speak with you again. Let's start off at the beginning, I suppose. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to actually realise that you had experienced an awakening and how, in elaborating on that, how your new website came about?
Yeah, the interview was set up because of the launch of my new website, awakeningmentor.co.uk, and that has come about as a result of the last 6 years of my life. So I've had quite an interesting awakening period, I would call it, over the last 6 years, which started with yoga and then led to me travelling to lots of ancient sites around the world, co-hosting tours, leading tours, leading groups inside the temples and the pyramids in Egypt, sharing some amazing life-changing experiences with groups of people. Running alongside that, I was the PR agent to a number of best-selling authors, a lot of the guys that appear on Ancient Aliens and various other channels like Discovery, Travel Channel, organising and running events in the UK and the US, giving lectures on Nile cruise ships, and basically speaking with hundreds of like-minded people at these events and these tours from all around the world. We had quite often 18 different nationalities on the tours. So it's interesting to speak with like-minded people that have been through different educational systems, because when you have this, we're going to call it awakening or spiritual awakening, doesn't seem to matter what your background is. The mind has this kind of inquisitive nature, and you share a lot of common ground. So I've tried to compile all of my experiences and the lessons and just share it with people on the new website. There's a lot of information on there. It's not a kind of you need to contact me. I've tried to give as much away to just encourage people really to follow their heart.
Yeah, you've got a lot of different topics.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
Well, it took on a life of its own, the new website, because I'm a web designer, so I put it together myself. And normally when you plan a website, it's going to be sort of 5 or 6 pages to start and then grow it from there. But that's not how this one came about. It basically was born as, I think, 23 to 25 pages, because as I started to work on it, it was really just flowing out of me. And I hope it's given people something of value.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting read. To elaborate on your section of what changes you would expect in personal awakening.
Mm-hmm.
Can you sort of give a brief on the challenges?
Well, what was the impetus for the website was because I was going to a lot of groups in London where people were starting to experience this kind of change in awareness, where you start looking at the world in a different way. And I was also running some workshops, so I had the opportunity to listen to a lot of people speaking about where they were at this point in time, the challenges that they'd faced, and it's shared challenges, so we experience them as individuals, so it might have a slightly different flavour, but a lot of these the points that we're going to experience will be the same challenges, just presented in a different way. So I realised that when I heard these people talking, it was like listening to myself speaking perhaps 6 years ago, and then there was like some other people speaking, and it was like that was me 3 years ago, because these events that we were going to, the majority of people were very new to this subject. So they weren't like myself, that's been going through it for 6 years and really travelling the world and trying to answer some of the questions. So I dedicated myself as best as I can to the subject. So of course other people don't have such a big perspective or a circle of friends to understand it through, which is always helpful. So that's where the website came from. And the subject on the stages of growth, well, that's based on what I've gone through as an individual and conversations with hundreds of other people about these same subjects. Because when you meet somebody that's like-minded, you can have there's so many different topics you can discuss about inner changes, how we grow, and the inner landscape and our awareness. But I noticed a lot of subjects that would come up over and over again. So that's why I listed a lot of those on the website, because they're very common. So people would be able to empathise with some of those points if they're going through it now. And also, just trying to really give a guiding light or highlight things that we would expect to see happening in the future. Just like a few signposts, really, for the people's paths ahead.
Yeah, because there's a lot of confusing information out there on what is awakening, and some, I guess there's so many of them, and I guess a lot of people may start that process by having their life circumstances change and their lifestyle, their bubble burst sort of situation.
Well, this is the thing. We reached a similar point where we're going to call it an awakening, a spiritual awakening, growing awareness, whatever label we want to put on it. There's something happens to us as an individual when we start questioning the world in a deeper way. And that can come about for a variety of reasons, which I've listed on the website. So, the dramatic ones we tend to hear about are things like near-death experience. But equally, people may ingest something from the plant kingdom, which can have this dramatic effect. Or just going through these kind of experiential spiritual tools, or something like yoga or Tai Chi, that has this kind of gentle uplifting effect over a period of time. So whatever path you may take, and of course there are many other options. I think some people just you start to awaken anyway, and then you might just start to add some sort of different changes to your lifestyle that make that change more noticeable, and it's a kind of snowball effect. So there's not like you can pinpoint it. There's 7 billion plus souls on this planet, so there's plenty of roads to follow, but you are heading in a similar direction a lot of the time.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask Craig a question, because he's actually a karate instructor. Do you get any, like, when you not when you're actually in combat or anything, but just your exercises and stuff, like, do you get that kind of energy flow happening through karate?
Oh, I guess so. Well, being an instructor, I find it fulfilling to teach somebody else, pass on the knowledge I've learnt to the students out there. Not really for myself to it, but just do it now to pass on the knowledge that I've gained, I guess.
Well, I can add, I used to do Kung Fu, Tiger Crane combination, and that does have a lot of information based around the energy system in the body, so the chi. And so they would train you to basically pull the energy up from your feet to your fists. So you're using like this whole body energy when you're doing the moves. And my Kung Fu teacher actually ran the British team. And there was one time when I was blocking a lot of punches, basically from, like nightclub bouncers. And I'm not that big, so these guys were much bigger than me. And I was blocking punches for a long time and in the end, my wrists swelled up after about half an hour or something. And this guy came over, Ian Armstrong, his name is, and he looked at my arm, and he basically started working with the energy. So it was like he was kind of smoothing the energy with his hand, and then doing this kind of method where you pull out negative energy, which he said was causing the swelling. And in front of my eyes, my wrist, which was very swollen, the swelling just disappeared. I was watching it happen. It just returned to the normal size. And that, I think that was one of the kind of points in my life, because you can't, if you see something happen with yourself, even if the world says, well, that's impossible, if you've seen it, then you know it is possible. So it was a good demonstration for me.
Yeah, wow. So let's start in Egypt. I want to talk about your experiences in Egypt, if we may.
Yes, well, that is one of my favourite subjects. I'm always happy to discuss that. Well, the background is, so I've done either organised or co-hosted 7 tours since 2010, and those tours are generally 2 weeks long. On top of the tours, I would spend sort of 5 or 6 days personal time, pretty much every tour. So I spent a lot of time in Egypt exploring. Been in the Great Pyramid somewhere, I think at this point, between 25 and 30 times. On some of the tours we've run, we actually hire the Great Pyramid just for our tour group for 2 hours. So it's like I've had unprecedented access.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that.
Yes. Yeah, so you don't have the normal kind of tourist flow. And my friends that live basically 3 houses from the Sphinx, you could say. 3 buildings, or even 2 buildings maybe. 2 buildings down from the Sphinx. Those were the Patricia and Yusuf Awiyan, who I was working with in Egypt. And when I went to visit them in 2011, they took me up to the Great Pyramid, and that was where I suddenly became aware of this connection between sound, acoustics, resonance, and the pyramids, which wasn't on my radar previously to that. I had been getting interested in sound use in yoga and chanting and vibration in the body, because I actually ended up having quite a few different yoga teacher friends, and I had quite a profound effect with vibrating my whole body, because when you're chanting or toning, there's a point where you can actually vibrate like the whole of the chest cavity, and the vibration comes into the mouth, and it's quite a profound effect when you find this right point.
Oh yes, I used to do that with my daughter, and with that and we'd harmonise together, and you could actually feel the vibration in your body when we harmonise. And
yeah, it's very profound when you can harmonise with another person. I mean, that's the effect that I ended up using on the tours with groups. Well, in the Great Pyramid, up to sort of 20 or 25 people in that space. But when I went up there in 2011 with Patricia and Yusuf, and they explained about the acoustics and this kind of resonance, because it's the King's Chamber, the topmost chamber, that's the granite-lined room, that they can't work out why the ancient Egyptians moved this granite 500 miles up the Nile, and how they got it so high in the Great Pyramid, and why all the effort was involved. And there's a lot of acoustic potentially acoustic anomalies surrounding the entire chamber, because it's been constructed in a way that it's not locked in to the foundations of the pyramid around it. And Flinders Petrie noted a few of these anomalies. So when you're looking at it from acoustic eyes, or archaeoacoustics, which is the science, then you can see that, okay, well, if you wanted a room that vibrated with resonance, that this would be something that you would need to do. And there is a lot of science being done at Stanford that people can look at. So there's a good science around archaeoacoustics. There is accepted that ancient sites, particularly around this time frame, somewhere around 2,500 BC, so this kind of Neolithic period seemed to have either some kind of understanding or ancient science involving sound and consciousness that we're only just coming to terms with. But there are leading universities looking at it, because I like to, if you're going to be a good researcher, you need to go off, look at the sites yourself, see what is really there, make up your own mind, and then look for other individuals that are looking into your area of interest. So that's why I started to look at the different universities around the world to see what was going on and what was known about sound and the effect on the mind, because of these amazing experiences that I shared in Egypt with groups, which are just, some of them were like something out of a science fiction movie. It's just so weird and strange, which I guess is why I was called to Egypt in the first place, because I thought life was far more interesting than I'd been taught at school.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt called in that direction. And I had the kind of veil lifted from my eyes when I was in Egypt. This really, they had some kind of ancient science and understanding of consciousness in a way that we haven't got to through modern science. An intuitive understanding, we could certainly say, but there are all these different levels of awareness and consciousness, these different areas of the brain, and if you can learn to either access them or just somehow tune in quietly inside, then you can get this really intuitive knowledge, and that seems to have been part of their system. So we haven't managed to replicate that yet, but the work at UCLA was one of the interesting universities I found, who, when they looked at these sound frequencies and the effects on the brain, somewhere in the 105 to 110 hertz range, they started to see this different dominance in our brains. So if we're kind of submerged in this sound frequency, there's a slight variation due to individuality, but around 110 hertz is where we see a kind of shift from, if we were just speaking very generally, it's a bit more complicated, but very generally speaking, a shift from the rational mind into a kind of more creative, intuitive space. You start to see the different areas of the brain lighting up using, like an EEG.
Yeah.
And so that's what UCLA and other universities have found. And then we've got the other studies being done that show that these ancient sites, many of them were tuned to a sound frequency around 110 hertz. So when we go there, and of course, maybe some people say, well, it's a coincidence, but the fact of the matter is, if we go there now and we use these ancient techniques using the voice or instruments, we're putting ourselves into a sound resonance field around 110 hertz, and it can have this mind-altering effect. And I can recreate it at the same site going back. So it's not like I went to somewhere once and we had a one-off experience. Every time you go there, if you have an opportunity, you can get different groups of people that you've only just met into this very intuitive space and share amazing experiences. So there does seem to have been this understanding, and it's really, dramatically changed myself, hopefully for the better. So it's been a fun journey.
So do you think there's any healing aspects to spending a lot of time in pyramids?
Well, this is the area that I'm studying at the moment, sound therapy, sound healing. There's accepted sciences like music healing, music therapy. These are starting to be used in hospitals.
Yeah.
It's much stronger, I would say, on the emotional healing front. The emotional healing front, because there's events like gong baths, where you get one of these sort of large gongs that you normally see hit with a hammer at the start of the kind of old movies. So these can be used at yoga studios, and they're quite easy to find, these kind of events on Meetup around the world now. So I encourage people to go along and experience that for themselves, because that's what we're really talking about. But if you go into one of these events, normally for about an hour, and just sit in these sound waves, quite often you will come out just a kind of much more joyous nature, kind of light-heartedness, like sometimes like a weight has been lifted off your shoulders, so you kind of feel emotionally lighter. So, of course, if you've never experienced it, it's hard to understand what I'm explaining, which is why I'm encouraging people to try it for themselves. But it feels very good. And so if you have a kind of regular practice, then you can really enhance this feeling and use it as a springboard as part of your inner growth. So definitely easy for other people to understand it on an emotional healing level. And you can, of course, if you're going through something personally that's difficult at the time, then you can use it as an opportunity to try and work on that in yourself. So it's kind of recognised on the emotional healing front. In terms of physical healing, we have had some interesting experiences with guests on the show. Certainly some physical symptoms. I mean, when you start looking into these like Ayurvedic medicine and these kind of things, there's a connection between physical symptoms and emotional problems. That's what's recognised in some of these other healing systems. So there was one guest that had a frozen shoulder. So for I think she said sort of 3 or 4 months, I believe she was Australian, she said that her shoulder was completely seized up. And she came into one of the temples with myself and one other guy, and we did some chanting, and she was very moved by it. She said it was a lovely experience, and after that her shoulder freed up because say for example, a lot of us recognise a connection between stress and muscle tension in the shoulders, and that's why quite often we go and have a massage. But what is the cause of this tension in the muscle? Well, it could be emotional stress that's building up. So I think most people could probably understand that.
Yes.
So some of these ancient techniques can free that emotional stress from a certain area of the body. So we've had a few things like that happen on the tours. One lady had a problem with her foot, I think she said for a year, and after we'd been in the Great Pyramid, she said it felt much better. But of course, it's quite difficult to prove it. But for those individuals that it happened to, it was obviously very meaningful.
Yeah. So, do you think in the ancient times that they obviously knew about this and were used for healing rooms?
Well, this is really where we have to be a bit more speculative. The main problem is the connection, written records having been destroyed. So in India now, going back thousands of years, there's a recognised, we could call it ancient science of sound healing and this connection of what it can do to the body. But what we haven't got is written records going back to the time of the ancient Egyptians that built the pyramids, saying we built the Great Pyramid as some kind of sound healing device. So there isn't any direct connection. So if we're going to back engineer it, the way that the universities are doing it is by looking at these ancient sites around the world, and they're starting to see the connection, like where because there's a lot of points that you need. So Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid, the landscape shares a lot of common points. So this seems to be the things that they needed. So it's like water, flowing water in the area. So you've got the Nile flowing past, basically, the Great Pyramid, the Giza Plateau, and Stonehenge is a river very close by.
Yeah, well,
the Great
water
Pyramid
is energy.
Yeah. Well, the Great Pyramid is built on limestone, and the Stonehenge is built on chalk. So it's a sedimentary rock. And so when you have this flowing water running through this type of rock, it does generate this very faint electrical charge, which we can measure. So if somehow you could harness that faint electrical charge, you could probably build up something quite large. And then it's the type of stone. So inside the Great Pyramid, it's a granite, which has a crystal in it, which you can see visually, and it's known to be in granite. And Stonehenge is made of a type of sandstone that has crystal in it, which you can see. So there's a lot of commonalities between these two sites. So hopefully the universities will start to understand this ancient system of basically integration into the planet and working with planetary forces, because you can imagine if you can even harness them to some fraction of a degree, then you're going to have a very profound effect.
Do you think it's magnetic fields or anything to do with the magnetism?
The only thing that I've really seen people researching on the magnetic front is when the stones have been cut out of the earth, and that they can see where the magnetic fields change. But what I could say is that some of these rocks, and like some of the places I've been to in America, which have a lot of iron in it, can generate magnetic fields. And when you go into those fields, it has an effect on your consciousness or awareness. So that's something that I have been looking into on my travels.
Yeah. A lot of the pyramids are alleged to be built on ley lines.
Yes. Well, the ley line subject I've looked into a lot, represented authors speaking about it. I'm not, in terms of ley lines running around the planet, I wouldn't call myself an expert on that, because it's quite difficult to prove through the scientific method, because I don't think anyone's really investigated it too firmly from leading universities, not to my knowledge anyway, but I'll be interested to hear if anyone knows differently. But so what I've been looking into is earth energies, and speaking to Dr. Robert Schoch at Boston University, who's well known for his redating of the Sphinx. He was in the Emmy Award winning documentary on that subject. So if you have a change in the geology, where you have one layer of rock underlying another layer of rock, say two different types of rock, or some kind of fracturing in the layers of rock, then you can measure very subtle energies. There's like an energy exchange or energy coming up to the surface, and this can be measured with electronic equipment. And I believe, and it's quite widely recognised in certain circles, that some of these ancient sites were built at these locations to either enhance or work in harmony with these earth energy fields, because it does have an effect on humans.
Yeah, I've even heard theories of that they were made for like some type of transmitting energy, on these grids throughout these different pyramids globally.
It's certainly a nice thought. What we can say in Egypt is that there's a good documentary called The Pyramid Code, made by Dr. Carmen Bolter, and she really goes into the theory that my friends, Patricia and Yusuf, Yusuf's father, Hakim, understood that there was a field of pyramids, which you can still see the majority of. It's not just the Giza Plateau. From the Giza Plateau, you can see to the south, Saqqara, and you can also see further pyramids to the north. And then when you go to Saqqara, you can see further pyramids. So it continues, and it's in the kind of line of sight on the horizon. So whatever they were doing with these massive pyramids, it does seem like they were certainly doing something locally. How far that extended, that's really the question. But these are massive buildings. We need to bear that in mind. They are not small buildings at all by any stretch of the imagination. So if you were trying to generate something quite big, the nearest comparison now will be something like a hydroelectric dam, which can have obviously generate a huge amount of electricity and be used in a few cities surrounding it. So perhaps they were doing something along those lines.
Yeah. Well, speaking of theories, I'm going to have to ask you this one. What do you think about the acoustic and levitation theory?
Well, I've looked into it a lot, and I've certainly read some interesting reports on the subject. The only really solid ancient story that I came across, it was from somebody like Herodotus that was in Egypt, somewhere around I think the 4th century, and the way he wrote it was that there was a piece of metal put on the earth, and they hit the blocks of stone with a metal rod, and the block would levitate the length of a bow shot and then drop onto the ground, which I thought was quite an interesting report. I mean, I've looked into Coral Castle and Edley Scarlin, that kind of thing. So in terms of, that's the levitation in terms of physical objects. Certainly, there's interesting reports on people levitating through doing, I guess you would call it, dedicated inner work, and somehow managing to lighten themselves enough that they can float. So I've read a few of those things, but there isn't really anything tangible. I can't tell someone how they can do it tomorrow. Not yet, anyway.
Not yet. Oh dear. So you've actually, I know we're jumping around a little bit, but what's this Hollywood thing that you were mentioning the other day? Like, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I went into Hollywood. I was in America last year, and I've been developing this TV show idea, which in a nutshell covers a lot of these subjects that we've just been discussing. So there's kind of cutting edge electronic equipment that's coming onto the market, and they're refining older electronic equipment so it's more sensitive. I mean, that's what's happening all the time with electronics. So we're at a new point where we can start to measure a lot of these subtle forces of the planet, because through my research, I'm satisfied that the indigenous peoples of the planet and some of the ancient peoples of the planet had an entirely different way of viewing life, nature, particularly, and our interaction with nature. And really, they've been marginalised, the indigenous people, and it's kind of laughed at, the reverence that they show towards nature, Mother Nature, that of course, provides us all with a home and keeps us safe most of the time. And certainly if we're in tune with her, indigenous peoples are quite often the first ones that tend to move if there's an earthquake or a volcano or something happening, because they haven't lost that connection. So I kind of have an understanding of why they have this reverence for nature, how they interact, the low environmental impact they have. I mean, some of these people have worked out sustainable systems, not to take too much and allow nature to replenish itself. So they have this sustainable way of being. Well, we don't have that with our modern society, and of course it's becoming more and more obvious that we're going to have to change our ways, because we're just going to run out of everything. There's going to be too many people. So there is things to learn from this way of being, and as a part of this kind of strong connection to nature, they have a more intuitive way of being, a lot of the time, more in touch with their hearts, and they kind of self-expression. So a lot of these problems that we are also experiencing as society, we can see other ways of just being, really, or being happy and less stressed, which are common problems. So I think a TV show that takes me out into the landscape, because I have a natural sensitivity to these places, I'd be quite happy to go out into the landscape to any of these places that kind of have these mysteries of being somewhere powerful, with a team with electronic detecting equipment. And I'm confident enough in my abilities that when I'm in the right frame of mind, which is important, a kind of relaxed frame of mind, that I could probably tell them where to use this electronic equipment to get some good readings. Because I've done it enough with different people and shared my techniques, and it's led to amazing experiences. And maybe we take some people with us to experience these sites. And really, it's about quietening our minds, getting into a very still place, and that childlike innocence that we had when we were young and outside in nature, and that kind of sense of freedom and joy in the heart that many of us have kind of lost touch with or don't get to experience very often. Well, we can still get to that place. And that's really, it's one of my greatest joys to show people that they can still get to that place, because it can be very liberating. So this TV show would be probably traveling around the US to start with, go out measuring some of these ancient sites, and really start to show people that the indigenous peoples are not just stupid and kind of, woo-woo, but there's actually something solid scientific that we can measure and show why they revered these certain places of nature, because they are unique, or they have these energies where people feel more in tune, or their intuition works better. There's not one answer, because in fact I think these ancient sites can provide many different things, not just healing, but these kind of insights and insights in different areas because of the subtle differences in the either the energy fields or the acoustics that were created. So it's a big subject.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Like, even going back to Indigenous people and them being so aware of nature, they actually watch nature too. They're aware of how nature is reacting in the environment.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, this is you can see in the records from ancient Egypt that part of their, like, for example, some of the ancient Greeks that went to Egypt probably around the 4th and the 5th century BC, and they were sent away to study for 20 years by the Egyptian priests. This is what we're told by the ancient Greeks. And I was trying to work out what they were sent away to study for 20 years, because that sounds like a lot of studying. And then when I was reading about the Druids in Wales and England, they also had an educational system that lasted 20 years. Well, this was before the internet and TV, so clearly they were studying something else. But there is one subject that I can think that is big enough to study for 20 years, and that is nature, how all of the insects and the animals interact in a physical world. Because if you study the interactions with insects and animals and the kind of environmental factors, in a way you can start to see the inner workings of life on this planet, if you follow me on that line of thinking.
Yes, and there is also cycles.
Yes, so all of these cycles and the interactions, if you submerge your consciousness into it, and if we understand that our inner nature is that same nature of the planet, we are not separate. This is where the big confusion is. We're not separate from nature. We are part of nature. So if we submerge our awareness and give ourselves time in these environments, we actually expand. Our consciousness expands into nature itself, because that is who we are. And we become more aware, not just of the natural environment, but of people, life, why we've come here. All of these big questions that we don't seem to have any answers to in the modern world can be answered through this system of study. And that is also what's written about in the Yoga Sutras. And the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is a huge part of this new website that I've put together, Awakening Mentor, because in the Yoga Sutras it discusses the challenges of being a conscious being, and it's you can call it a scientific study of the human mind going back into the mists of time. We don't even know how old this information is. It's one of the foundational texts for yoga. It's not really about physical postures. The main thing it says in there in the Yoga Sutras is sit and be still in terms of your physical posture. It's more about the interaction between our senses and our inner being. So I had a lot of opportunities to cross-correlate my personal lessons, lessons learned from thousands of hours I imagine I've spent on my yoga mat struggling to quieten my mind. I could cross-correlate it with that. I could cross-correlate it with what I've been studying in ancient Egypt and also my conversations with hundreds of people. And for my purposes, trying to get as close to the source of some of these big mysteries, the Yoga Sutras has a lot of profound answers that I can verify to be reliable and to help. And that's why it really gave me the confidence to launch the new website, because then I knew that I was on the right track. I haven't got all the answers. I've got some answers that have helped me move to this point. So those answers can potentially help others. I'm still going to need to find people that have spent longer on this journey of inner growth, because anyone that's dedicated themselves more than me can help me. And that's really the system from the Yoga Sutras. And it's a book of great depth that can probably grow with most of us for the rest of our lives.
Wow. This is a really good point to actually put your, say, your website address again.
Yeah, it's awakeningmentor.co.uk.
Awesome.
Lots of short. Well, I've written short articles. I know people don't really want lots of long articles, so I've tried to be concise, give people it's the suggestions, the things that have helped me the most. And I've been testing a lot of different things. I have a lot of like-minded friends, and they've found solutions to these problems that work for them. So I've gone around testing various methods and things that have come down through time for basically to help with this nurturing process of the self, getting to know ourselves better. How do we grow? How do we become more still, more heart-based in our thinking, the kind of growing empathy and all of these kind of things. So the major things that have been helping me, the things that I love, that I think can also help other people, I put it on the website and it's available to view.
You also offer mentorship too.
Yes, well, that the other side of it is that I offer a paying mentor service. So the information on the website is, of course, aimed at anyone that finds a website, so it's of a general nature. Now, some people that's going to be sufficient for, and that's why I put it on the website. They don't need a personal mentor, because we're all just there's so many variables being a human. Some people haven't got very much money. Some people have got a lot of money. Some people can afford a mentor. Some people can't. So all of these factors need to be taken into consideration, and I want to help everybody. So I've done my best from a general point of view to put lots of information on the website. Now, certain individuals may find it's helpful to speak with me, and I will do my best to motivate them for their point in time now. So these are their current challenges, and I can obviously discuss those, be a listening ear if I've been through something similar and it's part of the awakening process. And of course, I can speak from my experience. I can speak from the experience of speaking to other people that have been going through this awakening process. And we can also map out how to grow in the future, because using the Yoga Sutras, it's very easy. It's like our consciousness is at this point now. What we would expect to see with our consciousness on the next stage is X, Y, or Z. It's all clearly laid out very simply. The points are easy to grasp. How to grow, how the process of inner growth is well known and has been known for thousands of years, and that's why we've had some of these enlightened masters. The problem comes in on the human level, where we have to decide to set the time aside and dedicate ourselves. So each person will have their unique challenges with time, how busy their life is. But of course, if we really want to grow, then maybe we'll watch one less TV show or whatever it might be. But just starting off very slowly, that's my approach, really. We're not trying to get somebody who's not doing very much in their personal practice to then become a monk. Not everybody wants to become a monk, but maybe we can find 5 minutes or 10 minutes to do some kind of a meditation, or just to start practicing meditation to slow the thought train and start to come into this deeply relaxing place. And it's when we can start to tune into that, and it starts to become more of a priority to us. Once we've got a taste of it and we feel much happier, just stepping outside of the flow of life and the stress, whatever's happening, if you can just step outside of that for 5 or 10 minutes, it can really reduce the stress levels. So I'll be going through that process with people, and helping them to the best of my ability.
So what we're really doing here is like raising one's frequencies and vibrations, activating chakras,
looking at it from a certain perspective, I think that would certainly be fair to say. So it's not very. I work with the ancient system of the chakras. That's what's come through the Eastern mysticism route. So if we want to concentrate on the heart space, then a lot of people will call it the heart chakra. Now, whether that is the best method for the modern Western mind, is not something that a lot of people, just the average person, is going to know much about. So I wouldn't necessarily explain things in that way to those people, because you need to adapt to their background. But certainly the frequency and the sound and this resonance, that's what we are doing. That we are increasing the frequency of the being, and that's really the spiritual purification subject that the Yoga Sutras calls it, or purification, because what we're actually doing, rather than trying to accrue a lot of sort of new intellectual information, the best thing that most of us can do, depending on their personal practice, is this purification, as it's called. It's taking away things that we've built up, this kind of mentality of complexity, as some people have called it. We're basically talking and thinking too much, and that's why we're not very calm inside, a lot of us. So a lot of these things that have come to us from our life, whether it's labels that people have put on us, and we have this kind of bad self-image, we need to look at our self-image, because we all have this natural beauty in our hearts that we can shine through if it's given the opportunity. And we just want to start to sort of strip back some of these things that aren't naturally helping us grow. So it's taking away of things that aren't particularly constructive, and then putting some space in to allow our finer qualities to be nurtured and grow. And that's where this inner growth can take place.
So basically cultivating mindful thinking.
Yes, but we on an individual basis, we have all of these things that, of course, are holding us back. I mean, it depends on how long we've dedicated to inner growth. So it's we have to start somewhere. That's the point. And
so where we want to get
start now.
Yeah, but where we want to get, I guess, is to tune in with our higher self. Yes.
Yeah, that's certainly one way of putting it. The higher self, our intuition. I think those are it's us anyway. We're not going to be trying to tune into a separate entity, because that's one way of thinking about it, or sort of. The old system is that there's something outside of us that we need, but we need to be, I think it's healthier to be self-reliant, self-dependent, so wherever we are, we can get into this state, and there isn't some sort of outside force that we're naturally relying on. If we grasp that there's this aware universe, and that we're all part of that aware universe. Of course, it's, the universe has been known by many names, and God or gods, the different names, it's this same kind of force that's flowing through everything, and that's really, if we can get into this quiet space, it certainly can help this process of intuition.
Yes, intuition is something that you have to learn to trust your intuition.
Well, it's a very quiet voice, so whether we want to call it the heart speaking to us or the intuition, so most of us in our busy lives can't hear the voice because we need to be, the mind needs to be quiet. That's one side of it. The other side of it is when we hear that voice is trusting it, which from experience, my personal experience, yeah, it takes practice. I've listened to my intuition countless times, and it's led to me traveling around the planet, hundreds of thousands of miles, meeting and speaking with authors whose books I used to read 20 years ago, and I admired them, and I ended up representing them as an agent, and all of this came from listening to my intuition. Appearing on the BBC at 7 p.m. again was from following my intuition. So interesting things have happened, so I've learned to follow it, and life has become, you could say, more magical as a result. So as we're getting this process of mindfulness started, people will naturally start to hear this voice guiding them more. I mean, it's well recognised intuition that it can kick in even in, there's stories of police officers suddenly hearing their intuition, and it saves people's lives. So it is something that's accepted. I mean, it's not scientific, it's hard to scientifically prove it, but as a society, we accept that intuition is something that's part of many of us. Perhaps some people don't think it's part of them because they haven't experienced it. Normally, ladies, women are regarded as having a better sense of intuition. And if you look at it on a kind of emotional level, where the female of the species it's fine for them to be more sensitive and kind of nurturing, and maybe try and sort of say these things are good for being a mother, or whatever reason we try and put on it as a society. But on the opposite side is the male, who is supposed to be kind of strong and dependable, and sensitivity isn't really regarded as an aspect of that, generally speaking.
Well, for the male, let's change. Don't follow your intuition, follow your gut feeling.
Uh-huh.
That's more macho, huh?
But from my experience, my sensitivity, which I would have probably 10 years ago, maybe I wouldn't want to admit I was a sensitive male. Well, now I've come to the point where I realise that by being sensitive, I'm actually much stronger, because I tune into this kind of inner strength. So the inner strength I can feel it because of my sensitivity. So in fact, we would be stronger and potentially wiser men if it wasn't so frowned upon it's almost taboo in some circles to talk about this kind of subject as a male, but it's very sad, because if we accept that we have this sensitivity, as we all do, I firmly believe that we all have it, whether we have tuned into ourselves or not is a different question. But if we nurture that side of ourselves, then hopefully the wisdom will start to come through with that inner strength, and we can start to understand our partners as well, because we'd have a lot more shared ground with our female partners and wives. So hopefully this will be part of this awakening process that happens globally over time, and will lead to a new way of being for all of us.
Yeah, I think the older generation males would find it harder than younger generation males. Remember, big boys don't cry.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, no, I think that's definitely true. I think there is certainly consciousness is changing on the planet, and a huge part of the reason for that is the internet. The flow of information where you have somebody on one side of the planet and they put something on the internet or on Facebook, and somebody on the other side of the planet can comment or like it 1 or 2 seconds later. Well, that's a kind of a trivial way of maybe liking something, but it also expands to the creation of ideas, business, heart-based endeavours, charities, all of these things, the cooperation as a species, the potential now that hasn't been there is immense. So the flow of information, the kind of creation of new projects is the speeding up time, effectively. If we wanted to write to somebody in Australia from England like 150 years ago, it would have taken months to send the message and get the answer back. So time, in effect, is speeding up now, and it's a different world. So we've still got all of these problems, but there is definitely an opportunity for a lot of creative processes to take place as well.
Yeah. Now, when I was speaking to you last time, you actually were talking to me about cleansing oneself after you go, when you go out to the mall, and I'm one of these people, like some people call empaths or whatever, but you take on everyone's energy and you come back and it's almost like you've just been drained by energy vampires. Yeah. So the cleansing process is very important. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it was interesting because, as soon as the subject came up last time, you said about your experiences when you go out. So part of this awakening process is, well, what are we awakening to? And from a consciousness perspective, you can say that there's a lot of people in this kind of very material-minded state that we've been educated into, believing that if it's solid and we can touch it, or if science says it's true, then it's true. But what about this other dimension of reality that we can see through particle physics, where it says, well, actually, the desk that you can touch in front of you isn't solid at all, but it's made up of all of these tiny particles, and it's energy, but it's just formed into this state that appears solid. Well, there's a whole world around us that is, in fact, in this particle state, and energy, of course, is a huge part of that level of reality. If you could look at the world as energy, something like Neo saw in the Matrix, perhaps, then you would see all of these energetic factors around you. So when you go into somewhere like a shopping mall or public transport where you have a lot of people in a tight space, there is a huge interchange on an energetic front that the majority of us aren't aware of, but you do start to become more aware of it. First of all, perhaps most of us are probably aware of it on a subconscious level, but you become more consciously aware of it during this awakening process. And some people will even start to see some kind of colour behind this. But even if you don't see the colour, the main thing to be aware of is that all of us as individuals have what has been called an aura, but some kind of energy field around us. And that energy field is connected to our state of consciousness. So if you walk into a room like a yoga studio or something, where you have or a church, where it has a very kind of calm and still feeling, or if you walk into a room that has a lot of very angry people, most of us can tell the difference. That's pretty easy, that there's some kind of different environmental factors, and the energy is part of that. That's what we're
first thing that happens to you is you feel uncomfortable and then maybe a little anxious.
Well, because you're picking up on the feelings that's flowing through these other people. So when we're talking about this purification or cleansing, if as a sensitive person we go out into an environment with lots of people, there's going to be this exchange of energy. And if we're a lot of people are normally running around in cities and kind of very busy. They've got a lot of things on their minds. So there's a lot of stress in the air, and we will pick it up to some degree. So some kind of cleansing after we've been out in these environments can can be very helpful, and that's why I've written about it on the website. There's indigenous tools. I mean, normally plants, something that you burn that has a particular type of fragrance can clear these energies out of our energy field. And again, it's an experiential thing, so people don't need to take my word for it. I've listed them on the website. You can get these things pretty easily on Amazon, or try and find a local holistic shop to support if you can. Take them home, and after you've been out, give it a try and see how you feel, because that's really what we're trying to encourage people to do, is experience life in a different way, try some of these ancient tools and really see if they notice a positive effect from them.
Yeah, and cleansing is more important, I guess, than preparation before you go out.
Well, I mean, a lot of people, particularly when you're in these kind of circles, because there's a metaphysical world, so people do tend to try and pick up certain crystals or things which are said to have properties for protection. I mean, if people are open to that kind of thing, that's their choice. But certainly the cleansing after we've been out in the purification side is widely recognised. There was a good book I picked up which was called Spiritual Cleansing, and it made the point that we now, at this point in time, when we go out to a shopping mall, we can be interacting with the same amount of people in one day that our great-grandparents would have perhaps come in contact with in a year, or even if we go further back in time, it could have been like 10 years or their lifetime. I mean, it's such a huge number of people that we're coming in contact with when we go into these big cities, that we need to be aware of these factors that happen as a result of how we've set up society.
Yeah. Can you explain about rattles and your bells?
Yeah, well, with my interest in sound therapy and sound healing, I've been working around the different sort of indigenous methods, going under this premise that they understand what they're talking about, and we're just sort of starting to make sense of what they've been doing for thousands of years. I wanted to explore the different tools that they use and see if there was a noticeable effect. And rattles, particularly bell rattles, are really, you can imagine them a bit like a surgeon's scalpel for energy. So if you have some really sort of built up energy around you, the bell sound, this rattle, is capable of cutting into it and cutting it away from around you. And that's really how I kind of experience it. And I can actually, because of my sensitivity to sound, if I put the rattle into somebody's energy field, I can hear the resistance. I can tell the difference if I put the rattle around me and then go into a city and then I come back, I can feel it in my ear, hear it in my ears and feel the resistance in my wrist when I'm moving the rattle. So I can tell the difference in my states. So I don't need someone to tell me, oh no, that's not possible, like you're a bit crazy, because I'm experiencing that directly and experiencing it through a few senses. So I have confidence in that, and also have confidence because when I've worked on people, they have told me that they feel happier or sort of better. Some kind of positive impact has been imparted because of this process, and it isn't my system. And particularly the rattle picture I sent you, a Korean bell rattle that has 24 bells. You can shake it. It's got a lot of bells. Of course, it can create a very loud sound, but you can also use it to the point where you're only using one of the bells. And at that point, you can work on your kind of conscious awareness around the head very gently, and then I would argue, I haven't measured it through scientific equipment, but I can tell from the inner changes that when we're talking about these kind of readings on the EEG, where you're using these certain sound frequencies to affect different areas of the brain, well, that's exactly how it feels like when I'm working in this very subtle way. It feels like basically like a massage for the hemispheres of the brain, particularly if it's the left side of the head that does tend to get very tight if I'm stressed. So with these certain, the rattle, I can do like an inner massage and really relax the tension. That's how it feels.
Wow. Well, I'll have to. Have you actually got? Can you grab one and just so we can hear?
I'd have to run downstairs to get it.
Oh, okay. Not a problem. Maybe next time, because I'd also like to invite you back, and we have a open table or a talkback show.
Sure. I mean, it is quite a high pitch, so I don't know how well the rattle would come across on Skype. It might be a bit offensive to people's ears, but you can find even these kind of children bell rattles, because remember, a lot of us liked rattles as a child, and now I'm starting to see that there is this connection. It has this relaxing effect, the rattle. It's just that it's something that, again, we think, oh, it's for children. We don't need it as adults. Well, these indigenous people are using it as adults. And in fact, what the Korean shamans do is they attach bells to their legs and their hands and their hats. And what we know from UCLA is that when you create this sound that is a continuous sound, so whenever these Korean shamans are moving, they're just constantly creating this sound, then that's when it can have this effect on the hemispheres of the brain. So they knew one way or the other, they'd worked out that you need to put people into this kind of sound environment, and it can have this quite profound effect.
Wow. Did you experience anything in that manner over in Peru and Bolivia?
Some of the sites in Peru do have acoustic properties. Chavin, which is the one that Stanford are measuring, I haven't been to. That sounds like it's one of the best preserved, because it's like an underground system of chambers, and it's sort of north of Lima, further north than I went to. But even at Machu Picchu, the normal tourist guide will say that, like, the normal story when you go to these places is like the priest goes into some kind of corner of the temple, as they call it, or ceremonial space. There's some kind of acoustic effects. He speaks there, and then it kind of booms out over the audience, and they normally try and set it up as it's some kind of scary scenario. Now, you can interact with these spaces in a very different way to how they're imagining. They seem to have this kind of cookie-cutter explanation across the world from the places I've been to and listened to these people speaking. But you can also take a group into these spaces where there's this acoustic amplification and do the chanting or the toning to get this sound resonance going. And that's what can lead to the altered states of consciousness. And that's really what Stanford think was possibly happening at Chavin. But in terms of intact structures, the best ones that I've interacted with are in Egypt. There are also some acoustic sites that are north of Stonehenge that I visit regularly in England, and I've had some amazing experiences there, because even in England, if I use the drum, they're not quite so sensitive to the human voice, but just general members of the public that are visiting these sites, when they sort of get intrigued, they hear this drumming, and I say, oh, well, come into this chamber and feel the resonance of the sound, because what happens is you hit the drum, and the drum sound goes out into these rock walls, many of which have crystal structure, so as a resonance, and it reflects this sound back into the body. So you feel this sound wave penetrate into the body, and I mean, the general reaction is, wow, because people have never experienced anything like it. But of course, many of us understand on an emotional level how music can affect us. We all love different types of music, and some music can make us very happy. The wrong type of music that doesn't suit you can make you kind of feel very irritated and sometimes angry. And very soothing music perhaps can make us think of something that's been very moving in our life, or maybe even upsetting and make us cry. So we understand that there's this range of emotions that are available through listening to music, and sound therapy and this sound healing is basically focusing on these certain sound frequencies that can have an emotional effect for various different reasons. So it's not a big jump in our understanding, really.
Yeah, I absolutely love Indian music. I love American Indian music. I love the Peruvian flutes, and I love Aboriginal music as well. It's just like, they're all very indigenous music that I just love. I mean, I'm not saying I don't love other music, but I just feel just so calm. Yeah, it's just very beautiful.
A lot of art in it. What I would expect as part of people's awakening consciousness is to start enjoying that kind of music more. I mean, the Aboriginal music with the didgeridoo. Well, the didgeridoo is a very powerful sound healing tool that produces these sound frequencies and can be used for that purpose. So that was one of the Aboriginal solutions in Australia. So the drum and the rattle and these other tools. I mean, there's a consistent pattern around the world coming from indigenous people of the use of similar instruments to create a similar effect.
Yeah. I must admit, I collect instruments from all over the world. I've travelled a lot of places, and I've got Nuna's music box. So when my grandkids come around, they're playing all these instruments, and they absolutely enjoy it so much. Like different CDs that I've got, and they dance and play, and it's just wonderful to see that the kids even just get into this rhythm of their own. Like, it's amazing.
Well, I mean, we seem to come through with these a lot of these interests, like our creativity and music. We had these kind of classes at school, and then we choose a profession. Life becomes busy, and we stop doing those things. But actually, I wouldn't say I was the best artist by any means or the best musician, but I enjoy it. And so if I enjoy it, why not do it? I don't need to be necessarily trying to sell my pictures or whatever. I can just draw for my own enjoyment. And so this creativity that we came through with, that in many of us has sort of dulled, or we don't get to explore it, is going to reawaken to varying degrees. And if we nurture it, if it is something that we used to enjoy, then I would certainly encourage people to perhaps start trying again. Maybe you would enjoy it in an even deeper way as an adult. So a lot of these things as a child that we look back on fondly and used to enjoy, that life just kind of took us on this roller coaster, and there's this period of time where we didn't get to enjoy them. As part of the awakening process, we may start to find that in fact we get an even greater sense of joy, and it leads to this sense of inner peace and sharing, finding our voice. A lot of us have sort of been disempowered and we haven't been able to express ourselves. Well, as we start to expand our awareness, this expression, and particularly trying to speak from the heart to others, and that's really, I think, what this planet needs: speak from the heart and share your unique gifts. I mean, the more of us that can do that and hopefully find a way to earn a living and pay the bills, then the general happiness of societies will go up, and hopefully we can lead to a better future for all of us.
Yeah, that is correct. I must say, I used to paint when I was at school, and then I didn't start taking painting up until my mid-30s. I used to write poetry, then I become a published poet, and all this creativity, then I got into, graphic design, with the using Adobe products and graphic animation, and this whole creativity just flowed out of me, and I guess that's when I first started in my mid 30s started awakening on my own personal experience. Gosh, now I'm 50 plus, but it's very. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It is a process, and that brings us into law of attraction. What are your thoughts of law of attraction? I have mine, which I'll share after you. But if you can.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've watched The Secret many years ago. Came to the conclusion it was a bit of a simple explanation for a very complex topic. I mean, the thing is, we've got to put labels on all of these things. I would, my way of trying to understand the subject would be more through the ancient Indian system. So there's and again, it's a kind of vibrational connection, because I've seen it happen in my own life, where I get to a certain point and then like-minded people come into my life, and I've seen the pattern now. I mean, it's been consistent over the last 6 years. I've been doing my best to inspire others while trying to survive on this planet. We all have our challenges, and good things have happened. Amazing things have happened. I didn't give the conference lectures that I gave for any reason other than I wanted to share. I think that's part of why I'm here, to try and make sense of things. I seem to have had time to explore some of these kind of mysterious subjects. And if there is anything that I've learned, and it even helps one other person, then everything that I did is worthwhile, because even helping one other person just one step forward is a huge accomplishment, because you don't know what that person will go on to do. They might help 1,000 people, 10,000, whatever it might be. So what we're calling law of attraction, that subject is what you're putting out is going to come back one way or another, and it might not be instant. Sometimes it can be instant, depending on what situation you find yourself in. If you put out a lot of good, I guess, intentions, we can call it, a lot of positive forces that are coming from you, just because it feels the right thing to do. We don't need any other reason than that. It feels right to you to do something positive, then it will come back. And that seems to be the system that's been set up in this reality that we're existing in. Some people will be more aware of it than others. And all I would say to people is, do your best and share from your heart, and amazing things will happen.
Yes, and that's where you get your abundance, and it doesn't necessarily need, it can lead to financial abundance, but all these websites out there that, follow this way, follow that way, you're going to get abundance, financial abundance, it really puts a bad turn on law of attraction when they use it that way. I liked The Secret. I actually really liked how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go.
Uh-huh.
Did I say that right? you know what I'm talking about. And What the Bleep.
Yeah.
They were really good to watch as well, which were prior to The Secret, which was from Rhonda Byrne's from Australia, which is quite good. She's written quite a few books after that.
What I would say, I'm trying to do something slightly different with the website, Awakening Mentor. My philosophy, which what I'm trying to do is get into this kind of ancient mindset, this way of perceiving the world, which is very difficult because of the education and the world that we live in. But I've had, I would say, fleeting glimpses of it when I've been in Egypt. And in the Yoga Sutras, it explains these things in very, very simple terms. So what I would say one of our major problems with we want to call it the Western thinking, or the modern mind, or the type of mind that develops in a city and this environment, is it is overly complicated. We're trying to, our rational mind is breaking things up into thousands of pieces and inspecting it from all of these different angles, and we're trying to get to some kind of answer by dissecting everything into a million pieces. Well, that isn't the ancient system, and we're trying to solve this problem, which is a problem of over complexity, with over complex answers. So that is not the system that is helping me. It is a simple system. The system in the Yoga Sutras is very simple explanations. So you don't break it down into all of these parts, like using modern psychology and things, because the problem is that we're breaking everything down into millions of pieces. So you don't get to the answer by breaking it down into millions of pieces. So you need some other kind of completely different solution. And I think it was Albert Einstein that said that you need a completely different way of thinking to solve a problem. So that's what I'm trying to get to, and it is clearly laid out in the Yoga Sutras.
So it's more like a kiss approach, keep it simple.
Yeah. So you don't need any other law of attraction. I mean, there's obviously authors and documentaries and people wanting to write about it and explain about it. I think they've got the next explanation, but you can just break it down to something very simple. If it feels good in your heart, then share it and do your best for others, that kind of thing. And watch and see the results. I mean, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that, because we can feel these deep things within us. What is our gifts that we come here to share? What did we want to accomplish in this life? It's in there. It's in us. We know these things deep down. We need to tell our friend and start sharing it, so we realise more consciously why we've come here. But it's all there, just waiting for the right key to unlock it. And I mean, that's what I can hopefully do for some people with the website or the mentoring service. But we already know deep down, whether we want to admit it to ourselves and really acknowledge it and then start to take some kind of action. That's really the point. So, I mean, like on inner development, it's very, very simple. If you want to develop yourself, it's give yourself time for inner development, do some kind of spiritual exercise, put time aside in the week for the spiritual exercise, some kind of study to start understanding some of these. So you need some kind of intellectual information, but how much of time do we want to put into it as an individual? Well, that's the limiting factor on the inner development that we see.
Yeah. Well, law of attraction can work in the opposite way to what you want, because thoughts becomes things, and in what happens is what you most think about will happen. So if you're thinking negative, that's what you're going to get.
Well, I thought you were going to say law of attraction can work in the opposite way, that if you're doing something that's detrimental to others, that then you're going to attract that to you, because it does also seem to work in that way. It's when you get to the sort of karma side of it, which is obviously a complex subject. So yes, I mean, there's all these different, we'd have to call it frequencies, bands that it can work on. So it's some kind of a reaction to what you're doing anyway.
Yeah. So just in yoga, you just for someone that's just give a visual description of someone that has never seen yoga, doesn't know anything about yoga, that they've heard about yoga but they have no idea. Just a brief explanation of what they could visualize in their head.
Well, I mean, the average level of understanding about yoga seems to be a lot of people in a room, perhaps quite a lot of them ladies, doing some kind of postures, and it's some kind of physical exercise for a bit of toning of the core or something. But of course, there's a much deeper level behind it. So the original system of yoga, as spoken about in the Yoga Sutras, was sit down quietly, and then you're going to be basically watching your thoughts. I mean, the reason they call it the science of yoga, Yoga Sutras is actually built on a system called Raja Yoga, Raja being royal, so it's royal yoga. But it's about the mechanisms of the mind. So if I'm in a yoga class you're doing the physical postures, which if you're new to yoga, some of those can be challenging, which is why they have beginner classes and intermediate classes when you have more experience. So that's the physical side. The body can get into the postures, but depending on the style of yoga you do, I mean, there's lots of modern variations. The style that I went for is called Yin Yang Yoga. And so it's not this kind of fast flowing yoga, which is more physically demanding. Instead, you hold the postures for between 3 and 5 minutes. So you're laying on the mat with the body in a certain position, normally to, they say with the yin yoga, you're trying to work on like the joints and the deeper tissue, the fascia in the body, and also the meridian system, the energy system of the body. So you're working on this kind of deeper level, but of course you need to stay still for 3 to 5 minutes, which a lot of people find a challenge, because the mind is going to immediately start thinking in many of us. So the challenge is to quieten the mind, and that's where some kind of repetition of words in your head, like a mantra, even if it's something simple like I'm breathing in, I know I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. So you could sit in the posture for 3 to 5 minutes using that mantra. You do a series of these postures in Yin Yang Yoga, and then my yoga teacher will generally say, okay, now lay down on your back and see if you can see any inner sensations in your body. And she normally says, well, if you can feel a kind of bubbling under the skin in a certain area, that could be energy, the chi flowing. And it is possible through some of these postures to release these kind of energetic blockages. That's the understanding behind the practice. So that's what we need to do. Yoga is an opportunity, particularly if we go to one of those kind of classes, to start seeing the kind of thoughts that come up in our head. And I've listed the different kind of categories on the website. We can get all of these different categories of thoughts. So maybe you're getting slightly hungry, so you're going to naturally want to start thinking about food. So you just drift off thinking about what you're going to eat after yoga. And then perhaps you say to yourself, no, I've come here to yoga, I want to be quiet in my mind and get into that deeply relaxed state. And then the next minute, the mind throws something up about, oh, wouldn't it be nice to see my friend tomorrow? And it's just going to go through these series of different thoughts that it's going to try and hook you into, so you're not in the present moment. And that's really
that's why so many people find it hard to meditate.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, because it's basically the monkey mind is how it's described. We've let it run loose, so it's got into this state where we think we are our thoughts. So this is kind of one of the stages that can be scary for people. It's like, oh, well, if I don't have any thoughts, then that's not me. I am my thoughts. So you need to, first of all, acknowledge that actually you're not your thoughts. There's something deeper behind the thoughts. And so we need to start tuning into that, and that can be a challenge to start with. But
well,
once we start to acknowledge...
Isn't that trying to just shush the ego?
Well, that would be one way of looking at it. Yeah, there are certainly egomaniacs. I mean, that's a term that's used for some people. But we've let the mind run wild. The thoughts just constantly bubble up, keep us busy. And that's basically our general state of being for a lot of us. So going into yoga, slowing down, starting to tune into this deeper aspect of ourselves. And that's really where our heart-based nature is lying, and becoming in tune with this beautiful being that's quite often been hidden from ourselves.
Wow. I must give it a go.
Please do.
So one more time, can you give us your website address, please?
Yeah, so the new website is awakeningmentor.co.uk. I've got a couple of other websites, infinite-connections.co.uk. So that's the site that I organise the tours and promote the conferences through, that I either speak at or help organise. And Atlantis Evidence.com was one of my early websites that lists a lot of the big historical anomalies on this planet. And there is scientific evidence, particularly if you look at the site at Göbekli Tepe, and there's another one that's been found in Indonesia recently that have been carbon dated to around the end of the last ice age, and it shows that human society was well formed. It was a lot more advanced than this kind of hunter and gatherer nature that we were all taught at school. At this point, the history book should be rewritten because of what's been discovered in Turkey, but it's a big problem because it's going to also raise up a lot of questions about the history of humanity, humans, and evolution. But there are tangible things, not wild speculation. That's not what I'm talking about. Tangible things that science knows about, scientists are investigating further, and all of the answers to life, they're not with us at this point in time. Things have happened on this planet. The Ice Age probably destroyed a lot of evidence, society. Some of these ancient sites were probably gone under the sea when there's thousands of ruins under the Mediterranean when that got flooded. So there are a lot of big questions about existence, and each of us can explore them and make our own sense of it rather than relying on what we've been taught.
Exactly. Even Lemuria, and we could talk all night, I must say, but we're going to have to wind it up here, but we'll have you on the show again very soon, and probably have a talk back, or at least stay around the table.
Yeah, I'd enjoy that. I always like questions from other people. It normally makes you think in a different way about subjects that I love.
Well, it's been absolutely awesome again talking with you, and we might wind it up now, and hope to have you back on the show very, very soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Yeah, and thanks everybody for taking the time to listen. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Gary. Good night.
Bye.